have been thinking for a long time of what to tell you about Sweden. It is the 5th largest country in Europe, but at the same time, it has a population of only 10 million. After all, Sweden ranks high in various rankings in terms of economy, life expectancy, quality of life, democracy, and it is a country with little corruption and a great work-life balance. But I want to talk about the danger, because recently Sweden has been the only country in Europe where crime rates have been growing every year, and this is primarily due to immigrants.
Sverige har aldrig förr sett något liknande. Inget annat land i Europa ser något liknande.
Today, for 10 minutes, I will tell you how Sweden has achieved high results in the economy and development of society, but at the same time has put itself in danger from migrants. Why do many people consider Sweden to be a dangerous country? And is it really so? Hello! This is the backside of Sweden, which no travel guide will tell you about. Let's go! Before we begin to talk about the dangers in Swedish society and what has led to them, we need to understand what Swedish society actually is. This will give us an answer to the causes. So, Sweden, the home of IKEA, Volvo, and Spotify. It is believed that living here is very comfortable due to the high level of economy and excellent social system. And indeed, if we look at the level of GDP per capita, we will see that Sweden is a very rich country. Its development model is often called a social democratic utopia. What does it mean? In short, it is a cross between capitalism and socialism. But how did Sweden reach this level of development? Let's turn our guide a few pages back. At the beginning of the 20th century, 3/4 of the country's population was exclusively engaged in agriculture, which is a rather difficult occupation in this climate. In addition to the cold, it is also dark most of the time, so the Swedes were looking for another way to make money. And as soon as industrialization began in the world, Sweden became the fastest growing economy on Earth. The domestic market was small, and Sweden began to make good money on exports. For example, it made a good living on telegraph poles and railroad ties for the British industry. Sweden began to develop technologies domestically. Some of the first hydroelectric power plants in the world appeared in Sweden. In addition, it is worth noting Sweden's neutrality. The last time it participated in the wars was in 1814. 2 world wars passed it by, which means that money from the army could be redistributed to the economy, as Switzerland or Costa Rica did in their time. Today, Sweden earns money by selling timber, hydropower, and iron ore. Exports are still the main source of income. Sweden also has a strong service industry, including information and communication technologies. Sweden has discovered many unicorns, startup companies worth more than $1 billion. These include game developers, fitness companies, and music streaming services. At the same time, Sweden ranks quite high in terms of income distribution. There is the so-called Gini coefficient, which shows how income is distributed among the population. The lower the percentage, the better. So in Sweden, it is 28.5%, while in the US, it is 39.7%. Sweden has quite high public spending, which is 48% compared to 36.5% in the US. In other words, Sweden's economy is doing quite well, and the Swedes do not hesitate to invest this wealth in the social sphere. What does this mean? It means that the state economically supports its citizens in many ways. Sweden has large programs of generous social support. Great job, you might think. What's wrong with that? A person works, pays high taxes, and for this, the state in turn gives him or her support. But first things first. So, what do we have? Sweden is a country with a good economy and one of the few countries in the world with excellent social support for the population. Today, Sweden has state support for education, elderly care, healthcare, childcare programs, pensions, 1.5 years of paid maternity leave, state-paid kindergartens, and more. And the higher the social level of support for the population, the more attractive it is for whom? That's right, for migrants. Here are a few examples for better understanding. Affordable education. Studying in a Swedish school is free even for migrants with a temporary residence permit. And if you want to get a higher education, you can take out a loan from the state at 0% interest. Healthcare and education are mostly free and among the best in the world. And of course, there are cash benefits. Staying in the country and doing nothing in particular, a refugee can receive financial assistance of up to $800 per month. Therefore, the social orientation of the state and democratic laws have made Sweden very attractive to migrants. It is also worth noting that the Swedes themselves are open and responsive. In 1968, the concept of folkhemmet, the people's home, was developed. It describes Sweden as a family in which Swedes should take care of each other as brothers and sisters. Modern Swedish society is very liberal and equal. That's why migrants started coming to this country. In 1945, only 2% of the population was born outside of Sweden, and immigration remained tightly regulated. But in the 1970s, Sweden opened up and began accepting people fleeing wars and totalitarian regimes. In 1987, there were 3% of migrants in Sweden, and in 2013, this figure was already 12%. And as soon as the Middle East became unstable, the European migration crisis began. More and more migrants started coming to Sweden because of the humanitarian crisis. In 2015, this reached its peak. In just 1 year, Sweden received 160,000 refugees. Most of them came from Syria, Iraq, and Afghanistan, fleeing military conflicts. Sweden began accepting more people per capita than any other country in Europe. Today, it is more than 2 million people, which is 20% of the total population of Sweden. The authorities began to distribute these refugees throughout the country. Many ended up in poor suburbs. They interacted poorly with society and did not feel part of it. Many lived in poverty and were completely dependent on government benefits. Although the group of migrants who fled Iraq in the 90s, where Saddam Hussein was in power, had 2 times more chances to get a higher education than native Swedes, but only 18% found a job. The fact is that only 5% of jobs in the country require low-skilled labor. The majority of refugees are unemployed and mostly live on the cash benefits I mentioned above. And all of this turned out to be good ground for the growth of criminal activity. Gangs began to form, dealing mainly in drugs and weapons. Every year, they make about $500 million in profit from this type of activity. And conflicts between gangs began. Most conflicts are over the division of spheres of influence in the drug trade. They shoot at cars, throw grenades, and plant bombs. Conflicts with the use of firearms on the streets of Sweden. And more people who have nothing to do with it are becoming victims. In 2022, 62 people became victims of criminal violence. And in 2023, Sweden experienced very severe violence, which forced the country's prime minister to convene an emergency meeting and ask the army to help the police fight armed crime. One of those reasons for this sharp surge in crime was the collapse of the Foxtrot criminal group, whose leaders are abroad. The basis of these groups is made up of teenage migrants. Many teenagers who join such gangs have no respect for either the authorities or justice, and most importantly, they have nothing else to do. At the same time, criminal liability in Sweden is quite lenient. If you are 16 years old and commit a murder, then according to Swedish law, you face 4 years in prison, where you will have access to an iPad and will be able to communicate with your friends. So the risk is not as high as in other countries. In other words, a good economic situation, a high level of social support, and a loyal immigration policy have brought Sweden to this point. Sweden was not prepared for one of the most negative aspects of migrants' crime. In 2022, the Prime Minister said that immigration to Sweden had failed, leading to the emergence of parallel communities and gang violence, and that the country needs to reconsider its approach to this policy and make a decision. Most Swedes want to accept fewer migrants. the number of people who have a positive attitude towards immigration has dropped to 20%. But is it really that bad? And while you're waiting for the answer, be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss interesting stories about other countries. The best way to support the channel is to like this video. Thank you! Awesome! The crime rate has increased quite a bit in Sweden over the past 10 years. But at the same time, it still continues to be low. For example, it is much lower than in the United States. Although crime is in the headlines, it does not yet affect the majority of the population. In fact, there are two Swedens. There is the safe Sweden, where everything is fine and they only learn about crime from the news, and Sweden, which consists of migrants. They don't speak Swedish, they don't have jobs, and some of them join criminal gangs. Sweden has long emphasized the need to preserve its own culture and language, while not demanding integration into its own culture. This strongly isolated migrants from Swedish society. It did not use a selective approach to attracting migrants to its country, like Australia, for example. And so it found itself in a place where changes in migration policy are needed. Now, Sweden is planning to tighten the rules for immigration. For example, it is now compulsory for children of migrants to attend kindergarten, which helps them learn Swedish. Some critics say that other social problems, such as child poverty and insufficient funding for public infrastructure, are at the root of this crisis. What do you think? Will Sweden be able to quickly solve this problem? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like it. See you later. Bye.